There's some important Sonic-related news lately, and I've thought of giving it a shout-out, and I attempted to talk about it. However, because not a lot of people listen to these videos, I think I'm just gonna let you go other places like Sonic Stadium, or Sonic Retro, or Sega Retro, or Sega Bits to get that news. Because I'm just using this video blog series to give my opinions about things that wouldn't be the same to get from news, and it doesn't really matter too much how many people see it or don't see it, it's just stuff I like to put out there. So we're going to return a bit to last episode's theme, which was world building and narrative, how they can help people get hooked on the series and keep them coming back to games, even if those games don't necessarily have the best gameplay, or maybe they do, but people aren't necessarily interested in going back to see them. I'm interested in that sort of stuff coming back to Sonic, and so I want to zoom in on a more specific point of that sort of world-building narrative stuff and talk about voices. Because it seems to be a growing perspective, albeit maybe still a minority perspective, that voice acting has hurt the Sonic series, and it's been said by various respected, for good reason I admit, YouTubers such as Shay May and Kazerblade. Now, this is not a hit piece. I'm not going to say these people are dumb or malicious or anything like that. In fact, they make some very good points. But we're going to address what I think is a big point that they're missing as well. And this is particularly so with Kazerblade's video, because he says one thing that I think is very arguably mistaken with regards to voice, that Sonic is not cool anymore. And I must say, the word cool, if I made a video with that in it, I would probably put it in quotes. So again, this isn't a big criticism. I will acknowledge that he has a lot of good points, but I do have to dissect that terminology and say why it seems like his base argument is wrong. Okay, so Kazerblade does make a lot of good points, like Sonic from the get-go is designed around personality. That's what his early designs by Naoto Oshima conveyed, that's what his sprites conveyed thanks to new 16-bit graphics. That's what his promotional art conveyed to varying degrees. It didn't really get conveyed too well in the American US box art, which always depicted him with the same expression and the same pose, usually the same pose, but American games had the same sprites, and the American cartoon adaptations didn't feel as limited as the American box art for whatever reason. So yes, definitely Sonic has a personality in contrast to other game characters like Mario and Link and Pac-Man. They don't necessarily have a personality, and Sonic, to a much greater degree, does convey that personality visually. Now, here's where I think Kazerblade gets something wrong. Just because a character can convey a strong personality visually doesn't mean the character can't or shouldn't convey it in other ways, too. And the real issue with saying Sonic isn't cool anymore, well, to address the elephant in the room first, cool is entirely subjective. Not only is it a matter of opinion, what the majority opinion of cool is constantly changes. So I won't say that Sonic is cooler when he talks, or that he's cooler when he's silent, because again, that's all a matter of opinion. I can't make an objective statement of how Sonic is cooler. What I can make an objective statement of, though, is what Sonic was like when more people considered him cool. And Kazerblade's problem is that he considers Sonic to have been silent in that era because he's only looking at the games. However, most of us in that era, at least in the United States, did not. We looked at the cartoons, we looked at the comics, we looked at commercials, and in that sense, the period when Sonic was at the height of his coolness was not about him being a strong silent type. Again, nothing wrong with thinking a strong silent type is cool. Is Sonic a strong silent type? I think that's quite a stretch, and it always has been. He didn't talk in his games, yes, but that doesn't mean it was because he was intended not to speak. He didn't talk in his games, frankly, because, well, I can't say for sure this is true. It's safe to say that one big reason Sonic didn't talk in games is because of the same thing that most characters don't. Because he couldn't. Technology wasn't there to include a lot of voice clips in games, particularly the Sega Genesis had trouble synthesizing voice as compared to the Super Nintendo, and certainly compared to later-gen hardware. But again, elsewhere, Sonic talked in his cartoons, in his books, etc. Now, to be fair, a lot of other characters did too. That's kind of a thing they tend to do in cartoons and more narrative media compared to games, is they talk. Pac-Man talked, Mario talked, Link talked, Mega Man, etc. But the thing is, I can't really think of Mario or Link or Pac-Man or Mega Man as characters that have specific inclinations towards talking that stems from a personality. Some of them have catchphrases. For example, Link in the old Deke cartoon was known for saying, "Excuse me, princess," and Mega Man would say things like "sizzling circuits." However, that wasn't a huge part of their image, according to the people promoting the series. I mean, I'm sure fans made a meme of Link saying, "Excuse me, princess," even back then. However, it's not like it's the sort of thing that got promoted. Nintendo, for example, didn't bandy around Mario catchphrases. I don't remember Namco giving Pac-Man a relatable catchphrase. Sonic had lots of them. Or at least he had catchphrases he said a lot. He said "way past cool" a lot. He said "got an ace, let's race," at least in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. He said "got a juice," I think, in multiple media. Oh, and he called Robotnik a lot, too. Back then, a lot of the line between various different incarnations of Sonic was a lot less solid than it's been made since. Sega of America didn't seem to care whether or not they were depicting game Sonic, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic Saturday AM Sonic. I wish we had a better nickname for his show than that, but we're stuck with saying that because his show had the same name as the game. Sonic Underground came pretty late, but Archie Sonic certainly. Like, if you look at early Archie issues or various promotional art for Sonic, or like the Michael Teitelbaum books, it all sort of merges together. You might see Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Robotnik, show up in a game art, or in a book that otherwise seems to adapt the Sonic Sat AM continuity. And again, Sonic's catchphrases keep showing up. In the Archie series, they call it the most way past cool comic book. It's something that Sonic said. People got attached to the idea of Sonic expressing his attitude vocally. And much is made of how the primarily Saturday morning cartoon version of Sonic had become the version of Sonic in many Western fans' heads, and it more or less stayed that way until Sega of Japan pulled rank and forced a more brand unification approach, starting with Sonic Adventure, and there were a lot of changes. Knuckles was suddenly more important, Amy was suddenly the main girl character instead of Princess Sally, Robotnik gradually transitioned to using the name Eggman in a really weird way. The notion that it took place on planet Mobius was dropped in favor of it taking place on Earth, which maybe it had always done in Japan, or maybe they just hadn't specified where it took place in Japan up until then, but they moved it to taking place on Earth. All that being said, Sonic himself wasn't that big of a change for most of us who got grown up hearing his Deke incarnation voiced by Jaleel White and repeated throughout Western media. That didn't seem like a big change. Like, maybe if you were only familiar with the games where Sonic was silent, it seemed weird when he jumped onto the scene in Sonic Adventure and said, "Oh yeah, this is happening!" But for those of us who had grown up with him saying things like, "way past cool," that wasn't really a big stretch. I mean, we were all used to Sonic spouting lines about how cool something was or how bogus something was. So I don't think Sonic changed that much in my perspective in the jump from Western-styled narrative in peripheral media to a stronger narrative in game. I didn't feel it jarring, and so at least initially, I didn't think of Sonic having a voice or catchphrases or exclamations was any problem. It was just what Sonic was to me. Now, that started to change a little bit later, and this is where I think people who consider voices annoying have a point. The question is, what is that point? If it isn't that Sonic is annoying when he spouts catchphrases, or at least that's the sort of annoying that Sonic fans are willing to tolerate, since it was what he acted like even at his most popular, back when Sonic was considered cool, even if he wasn't objectively so. What is it about some other voice points that make him seem less cool? Well, I think part of it has to do with the times he talks, in what circumstances he talks. Because there's certain expectations we have about how speech should go. Some of you here may be familiar with the artistic concept of the uncanny valley. That is, the closer something looks to reality, the more it annoys people, or sometimes even scares people, or sometimes amuses people, but the more it's noticeable to people that it's not realistic. So there's a place you have to get past in order to look fully realistic, or realistic enough not to look bad. My theory is that the uncanny valley applies to more than just visuals. It can apply to other things, and in this case, what I'm applying it to is sound. So let's start with something that's unrealistic, like making a weird, synthesized noise when a character jumps. Mario makes that sort of noise, Sonic makes that sort of noise, Pac-Man doesn't jump, but he makes that sort of noise moving around. Back when sound effects in games were so broadly unrealistic, they were such that people could tolerate the unrealism. Now, once you introduce voices, though, you get closer to reality, and that's when the uncanny valley kicks in, and people start to observe that these are not the circumstances that you would normally hear speech in, or a speech in these circumstances wouldn't sound that way. So here's where there's a difference between catchphrases and sound bites. Now, their line is blurry, obviously. Sound bite can easily become a catchphrase because people have gotten so fixated on it. However, the key issue with how sound bites are used is that they trigger in situations that normal people would not, or I guess talking animals if they actually existed. Normally they wouldn't use such speech, or they wouldn't use it so consistently, sounding the same every time. I'm talking about things that's not just Sonic, things like Mario shouting, "Let's go!" whenever he hits the boost in Mario Kart, or Eggman saying, "You know what they say, the more the merrier," or "Take this" every time he attacks. So yeah, it's not just Sonic, and in Sonic's games, it's not just the main character. A lot of video game characters do this, and again, because that's not how speech actually is, it sounds wrong, and people get annoyed by it as such. The solution, then, is you should cut down on those voice clips that happen, like whenever somebody punches, whenever somebody does any sort of attack, whenever somebody jumps, because it just gets on people's nerves to hear the same voice clips again and again, in a way it doesn't when it's synthesized sound effects, because again, that's far enough from reality that it's tolerable. But voices bring it closer to reality, so you have to be more realistic about how speech actually works. The other thing I think affects Sonic's image when it comes to speaking, and I'm just going by Sonic Colors here, which is the game that a lot of people have started taking issue with dialogue-wise. Like, I previously mentioned Shadow the Hedgehog. Sonic can talk. I don't mind that. It's fine for Sonic to talk. It's fine for Eggman to talk. A lot of characters can talk. However, I think that speech, while it's a big part of Sonic's identity, in my opinion, should not undermine his identity. So what Sonic says, and the context in what he says it, much like the voice clips that repeat, also applies in terms of speech that actually advances the plot. For example, one thing that I find annoying, and many people find annoying in Sonic Colors, is that Sonic stops moving, or he stops running to deliver voice clips. He'll emote visually, but he stops running to say something. And one of the bits that people spread around as something that particularly annoys them is the final scene where the place is about to blow. Eggman's broken out his big robot, people are evacuating, or aliens are evacuating, and Sonic says things like, well, when I hear a lot of aliens running and screaming from something, I get a bad feeling, yeah. And I'll admit, I actually find that joke pretty funny, but it seems like the sort of thing that Peter Venkman would say. And the context in which it occurred, Tails is saying, so it's time to run, and Sonic says, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Like, why does Sonic need somebody else to convince him it's time to run? That shouldn't be a big deal. And I think throughout the rest of the game, well, it's not as jarring to see Sonic pause in such a scenario where obviously he should be running out. Big problem I have is that more of his taunting attitude isn't worked into the fights themselves. Like, he'll deliver a bunch of quips in front of a boss fight to a boss that, since it's a robot, doesn't even react. And so it's pointless. It doesn't feel like it's part of Sonic's strategy to irritate and taunt his to irritate his enemies with taunts because they don't react, and he's not really gloating while he's zipping around. It just feels like he's putting a hold on being Sonic in order to be somebody else who just likes to hear himself gab, and that's obnoxious. So where would I take this series voice-wise if I was running it? Now, contrary to something like Kaiser Blade or Shamey, I wouldn't get rid of voices, but for me, two things should be done to make it feel more lively and feel more organic. I guess you could substitute the word realistic for organic, but it's obviously not the best word to use in a series with this premise. However, in order for Sonic's speech to function in a way that he feels like Sonic, first and foremost, get rid of the voice clips that happen every time something is done. Like, every time you press a certain button, they say the same voice clip, the same hiya, the same ouch when they get hit, the same take this when attacking, that sort of thing. Get rid of that. Maybe have it once in a while, but don't have it trigger constantly, and maybe have the characters say something differently, like generated at random. But as to dialogue, I think instead of grinding things to a halt for cutscenes, have dialogue that plays during battles. Like maybe not so constantly as it is in Sonic Heroes, but if Sonic's gonna taunt bosses, have it be during fights. Like, a game that I think did that very well, actually, is Sonic's Level of Lego Dimensions. I take issue with a lot of the Lego game's mechanics, however, that game handled dialogue and in-jokes related to Sonic very well, and it seemed like it fit Sonic's personality very well, because he was constantly doing things while talking. Well, I mean, there were cutscenes, but Sonic was also doing stuff while moving. So I think that's the big difference here. What we need, if we're going to have Sonic talk, is to have Sonic feel like a real character who has a very set personality tied to his actions speaking. So yeah, if you haven't played Lego Dimensions Level of Sonic, or at least watched the video, I reckon people should do so to get an idea of how Sonic should talk during his games. And that's pretty much all I got. Obviously, there are a few other nitpicks I could go into, like I wish Pontaff wasn't writing this stuff. Like, I'm not going to say Pontaff and Graf have never made me laugh. I think based on my playthrough of Sonic Colors and subsequently Sonic Generations, they tend to write Eggman the best, and I think the reason for that is because they take this series as trivial. They've admitted not to being Sonic fans. They come from the Happy Tree Friends cartoon, which makes light of animals getting murdered. So I think the one character that really gels with their persona is Eggman, who doesn't mind harming animals and does treat it all as a game. They can fit Eggman pretty well. But the rest of the stuff and the rest of the characters, it seems Pontaff and Graf don't do well. So yeah, I wish they would go away. I think especially since they were trying for a more serious plot in Sonic Forces, they should have hired writers that took it more seriously and cared more about the lore. Although I don't know how much that would have helped Sonic Forces, but that's about it for this episode, because I pretty much said, I think, everything that I could say about voices, and so later.